This evening we have the pleasure of hearing from Diane Randall, Hannah Graf Evans, and Itzel Hernandez. They are going to address the topic, Love Thy Neighbor, No Exceptions. Advocacy for welcome, not walls. We will again follow the practice of writing our questions on cards you have picked up and passing them to the end of the row. 3 friends will compile our questions and ask them of the speakers. Please don't hesitate to submit your question before the talk is over. This will allow our speakers more time to address your questions. I'd like to introduce to you Diane Randall, who is the Executive Secretary of the Friends Committee on National Legislation. A lifelong advocate for peace and social justice, Diane is a fierce proponent for citizen engagement that advances policies and practices to create a better society for all. I'd like to introduce you to Itzel Hernandez. She is an immigrant rights organizer for the American Friends Service Committee, and she served the FCNL in 2017 to 2018 in their advocacy corps. She was born in Mexico, and she immigrated to the United States at the age of 10 with her family. A deferred action for childhood arrival recipient, a dreamer. She has seen firsthand the real-life consequences of inhumane immigration policies. Itzel is passionate about engaging immigrant youth in political activism on a range of social issues. And I'd like to introduce you to Hannah Graf Evans. Hannah has been FCNL's lobbyist for immigration and refugee policies since 2014. She believes that our immigration system should empower immigrants and American communities to which they belong to lift up voices, the voices of border communities, and ensure adequate protections for refugees, asylum seekers, and victims of trafficking. They will tell you more about themselves as part of their talk. Diane will begin speaking out of waiting worship.
You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39. Now, as Quakers, we don't talk a lot about commandments. That isn't usually part of our discussion in spiritual formation. But we do talk about our inner leadings. We do talk about how way will open. And we do read and learn from our own books of discipline, our faith and practice, which includes advices and queries. And I want to read the advice from Brittany Early Meeting, the first advice, which will be familiar to you. Take heed, dear friends, to the promptings of love and truth in your hearts. Trust them as the leadings of God, whose light shows us our darkness and brings us to new life. At the Friends Committee on National Legislation, we have and do try to listen to the promptings of love and truth in our hearts and listen to the promptings of love and truth from friends around the country. We have also looked at the biblical basis of our religious society of friends. And it is from that we came up with the distillation to love thy neighbor, no exceptions. Now, it's true that this does fit on a bumper sticker, conveniently. It also fits on a big banner, which you have seen, and some of you have blazoned on your own meeting house walls, which we think is a great message. At FCNL, we've put it on the outside of our building as well. And some of you may know that our building is in the heart of Washington, D.C., right across from the Senate office buildings and right down the street from the U.S. Capitol and the Supreme Court. There's a lot of traffic that goes by that, and that captures a lot of attention. People pause to take a look at it and take a picture of it. But it's more than a bumper sticker, and it's more than a billboard. When we created this message, it's a message that we want to send to the world, but it's also a message for us. It's a message asking us, how will we work in a way that demonstrates love? Now, like many of you, I have spent time in the last 3 years, in particular, thinking about how do I display love when I feel anger? How do I move forward with a loving attitude toward Congress and to those I'm relating with when I feel heartbroken? And the way that we do that is that we listen to our inward truth. The way that we do that is that we live in community to do it together. Our goal, along with many people who are here and people across the country, is to build a network of people who are in relationship with the U.S. Congress. Well, what's that look like, to be in relationship with your member of Congress? So for us, what that looks like is having lobbyists like Hannah who represent particular issues, who represent the priorities of what FCNL works on, who are talking to members of Congress and to the offices on a regular basis. But it also means, and significantly, that we have people all across the country who are willing to talk to their own members of Congress on a regular basis about immigration, about peace, about climate change, about ending war. Your voices are what truly make the difference in the advocacy of the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We've been around for 75 years, and we are known in the Capitol very well. We're known among friends, and our goal now, as we move forward into our 76th and 77th year and onward, is to build out this network of friends and like-minded people across the country who are willing to advocate for these incredibly important values. I think many of you know FCNL's vision. It's one that I love particularly. We seek a world free of war and the threat of war. We seek a society with equity and justice for all. We seek a community in which every person's potential may be fulfilled. We seek an earth restored. As you know, we just establish our priorities, and we're going to be talking about one of those priorities in just a few minutes. Hannah and Itzel have a great deal of expertise that they're going to share with you about the immigration system, about our advocacy, and about what you might be able to do to address this deep concern that we have. This is the priority as it was approved by our General Committee: to seek an immigration system that promotes and respects the rights, safety, and dignity of all immigrants, refugees, and migrants. I think probably many people in this room and across this country share a sense of outrage at the travesty at our southern border. The detention of families, the separation of children, the militarization of our border. It's shameful and heartbreaking. And that our president uses his platform to bully and demonstrate bombast worsens the situation. But the problem of border detention and deportation of immigrants didn't start with this president, and it probably won't end with this president. This is a long-term problem that this country has that exists at the border, but it exists in all of our communities. The issue of what we will do about immigration, migration, and refugees. And I also know that there are people in this room who are working on a regular basis to work with undocumented people, to work with refugees, and to try to welcome the stranger, as we heard in our song earlier, as we are admonished to do so in the Bible. We are facing a challenge of human migration that is even far beyond the United States. Many of you are aware that this past year, there was just news reports that 70 million people were fleeing persecution, war, sometimes the devastation that was a result of climate change. And so all across the world, we're seeing this crisis, and people are looking to the United States to see what we're doing to address it. And I'm afraid we don't have great examples of what our current public policy is. But we believe that it is possible to change the public policy with political will. And that's where all of you come in. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Nations must develop better public policy solutions to address this crisis in order to address the root causes of migration, and also to do so with the humanitarian approaches. At FCNL, we're lobbying on specific solutions that address the appropriations of these detention and deportation. But there are other avenues that people are using in your local communities that are also incredibly valuable. And we know that there are also people who are risking arrest and who are demonstrating and doing direct action to show their disdain for this, including members of Congress who are using their own bully pulpits to show the problem. We're also, I want to acknowledge that our colleagues at the Quaker United Nations office and other places are also working on this issue of migration and how we can best address it. One of the premises that we have as friends for our testimonies in terms of how we live our lives is the testimony of community. And that's so visibly demonstrated in this gathering, the sense of community that people hold in coming to the gathering every year and being with one another, worshiping and learning together and sharing fellowship. When I think of community, I think of it, we can think of it at lots of levels. We can think about the world community, our local, town, country, city community. We can think of our meeting communities, which we often do. Obviously the gathering. We at FCNL think of having a community of people across the country who engage with us. But when I think about the purposes of community, I think of community as a place where we can be challenged to think differently, and we have been challenged here. And not just to think differently, but to act differently, to take on new forms of spiritual disciplines, to address racism, to address colonialism, to address sexism, to address war. This being done in community creates a different opportunity for us. Community also is created to affirm us. It's nothing probably more wonderful than being with people who can see your gifts and can tell you your gifts and can speak to that and can draw those out of you. It provides a place for spiritual practice. And we all know that we are all still practicing. We're getting better when we practice, hopefully. It's a place to build resiliency. And that's an important aspect of what we can do together. But it's also a place to learn hospitality. And I want to linger on this issue of hospitality for just a minute. I know it's an issue that FGC has taken to heart in looking at how to be welcoming meetings. But it is a place that lesson extends so far beyond who we are as meetings. It obviously is a lesson and a concern for what's happening across our country right now. We see ourselves as a country that welcomes a stranger, but we aren't doing that. Our demonstration is to reject that. And in fact, when we look at our history, we can see that throughout our own history, we have rejected the stranger in so many ways. And so this lesson to how we can do that better is one that we can practice both in our own home communities, but we can practice it by engaging our Congress to create public policies that will welcome the stranger. One of the focus of FCNL's work in the last few years has really been to build out our young adult program. And when I was first approached to speak at the gathering and asked to talk about immigration, I was delighted to be invited, and I was also pretty clear that I wouldn't be doing this alone, that I would engage some others who have been so instrumental in helping us advance our work. But I want to say a word about this young adult work. FCNL has, as many of you know, a long-time internship program, which we now call Young Fellows, and Hannah started in that program and then became a full-time lobbyist with us. We also have an advocacy corps program, which brings people to Washington, and I think Itzel is going to talk a little bit about that. We have a couple of other people here at the gathering who have been part of our advocacy corps program, and the director of that program, Katie Breslin, is with us tonight. But this program is one that engages people to learn how to do advocacy and then to go back to their home communities and advocate. And the reason I want to emphasize this program is because we ask those young, advocacy corps members to go to local meetings and to engage the local meetings to advocate with them. And I want to ask you to extend hospitality. If these advocacy corps members come into your meetings, will you welcome them? Will you accompany them? Will you listen to them and to the wisdom that they have already? And will you nurture them? They aren't necessarily coming to become Quakers, but they are coming to engage with you and to witness with you. And so I ask that that's something that you in your local meetings consider doing. We have summer interns working at FCNL that we're delighted about, and of course we have a spring lobby weekend. And for the last 2 years, our spring lobby weekend, which occurs every March, has had a focus on immigration. And there is a power in standing up here and looking out at all of you. And I want to say there is a power standing in a room and looking at 500 young adults who have shown up from 42 states to lobby for immigration. And it is an awesome thing that we have been able to create to invite people in. And I want to also thank you who have helped support young adults to come. Many meetings and churches across the country have invited people, have actually helped sponsor people or have brought people, and that's a really wonderful way to engage. The final thing I want to say before I turn it over to Itzel is this. You know, we do a lot of kind of creating a young adult program and calling it a young adult program. But I will say to you that one of the things that happens is that these young adults become colleagues. They're not young adults. They are accomplished professional people in their own right. And so I'm delighted to be able to have you hear now from Itzel and then from Hannah about the work that they're doing.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Itzel Hernandez, and I am the Immigrant Rights Organizer for Monmouth and Ocean County in New Jersey with the American Friends Service Committee. I found my way to this work, I think, in two different ways. I grew up undocumented most of my life. I am a DACA recipient, as Diane mentioned. For those of you who do not know what DACA is, it was an executive order that President Obama put into effect that created a category of priorities as to who was going to get deported and not likely to be deported. And if you've met specific qualifications, so if you had been in the US for 5 years, if you were free of committing any type of criminal activity or anything of that sort, you would get this EAD card, which is an employment authorization card. And that meant that you were less likely to be deported. And it is something that I'm not sure how many of you have ever seen what that work card looks like, because if you're a citizen, you don't ever get one. And I think for a long, long time before I got DACA, I learned a lot of skills to survive on my own, right? So how to survive growing up undocumented. But I didn't find my way into advocacy, even though there was a need for me to learn it. And it was partly because I didn't see the tools that were given to me, and that support and that confidence that I hadn't found anybody that tapped me and said, you can do the change that you want to see. You do have it in you to go out there. So I had graduated college in 2017, and I found through another student the application for the Advocacy Corps. And I read the description, right? 10 days in DC, and then you go back home and you do some work in district. My class focused on climate change. And then you get, there's a stipend that comes with it. And I honestly, A, couldn't believe that that was even a program. B, when I saw that there was a limited amount of spots, I think when it was my class, it was 18 in the country. The student that had mentioned the opportunity to me, I honestly in my head thought, well, I'm flattered that you think I would be one of 18 that would get picked, but let's not really kid ourselves. Like, this is not going anywhere. But nevertheless, the voice in the back of my head pushed me to actually do it. And also a little bit of guilt that I didn't want to see that student and say I didn't follow through with the application. I figured worse, I would just tell him I didn't get accepted and I wouldn't lose any credit. And so thereof I went, super nervous, sent the application in, not thinking much, and found an email a few weeks later saying that they wanted a first round of interviews. And I thought, this is really funny, that this is happening and what are the odds? And it's always that sense of, oh my God, could this be a reality? And then the second interview came. And then eventually I got a phone call from Katie Breslin saying that they wanted to offer me a spot. And I still vividly remember that moment and what it meant, right? Because it was such a transformational moment in my life. In many ways, it was that specific thing that validated all the things that I had worked so hard for. When I came to the US, I was 10 years old and I didn't know how to speak English, right? So I was maybe 22, 23 when I got accepted into the program. So if you think of it a little bit and you try to put yourself in my shoes, that 10 years prior, you didn't even speak the language, right? It took you 2-3 years to learn it, and then you kind of have to be a teenager, and that takes up all of your time. And then you find out that you're undocumented, and we'll delve into this more as to like the shock. It's a whole frame of mindset that you grow up in as if you were looking at the world completely differently. And then after that executive order came into effect, the opportunities that open. And so here I was getting this phone call saying, you get to go to DC. And it was unbelievable. And I didn't actually believe it for a while. I called my mom immediately. And to her, it was like, well, obviously you were going to get it. And I mean, what else is my mom supposed to say, right? I love the fact that she believes in me that way. But I can tell you to this day that that experience, just arriving on the Capitol and seeing those buildings that I never thought I could take up space in, why would I have the ability to take space in those places? Why would they ever want to hear from me? And it was climate change, but nevertheless, who was I to get the opportunity and the privilege to walk these halls? And when I did, and I got those skills, and I built community, and I got to meet so many amazing people, all those skills that I learned immediately became something that got put to work when it came to immigration. Because it was that experience that allowed me to realize that I had it in me again to make that change. If I could stare down at a senator, I could definitely go back into my community and do it again and again and again until I got what I wanted. And so that's how I found my way into advocacy, right? Because there was a program that truly believed in young people. I didn't just say they wanted us to lead, but gave us the tools to lead. And so it has been an incredible ride since then. It feels like it was a very long time ago, but it wasn't. And it's been a lot of fun, and I'm just really, really happy to be here with you guys and share a little bit of my journey.
so hard to follow, Itzel. So I took my citizenship for granted. Before I started working at FCNL, I knew pretty much nothing about immigration. It was something that I knew vaguely about, but in 2013, I would say I was very much focused on the world. I grew up Quaker, I grew up abroad, I was focused on international issues, and I saw my year at FCNL as partially, I don't know what I'm gonna do after college, I guess I'll go work for the Quakers. And partially as I really need a crash course in Congress, because as I learn more about the international world and the global conditions, I am realizing the undue power that we have as a nation and that Congress holds in some of the things that I was thinking about on more of an international law, international scale. And so in many ways, I was completely unprepared to learn about the things that had been very, very hidden for me prior. So there might be some people in this room who are shocked that in 2013, I had no concept that there was a comprehensive immigration reform bill that was voted on in the Senate and that died in the House. And for some of you in this room, it could be that you also woke up pretty recently to the state of immigration in this country. So when I got to FCNL, here's what I learned. I learned that it's been 30 years since Congress has meaningfully looked at the immigration system. In that 30 years, there's been a lot of enforcement. Congress has appropriated money for 750 plus miles of border wall. There's 6,000 hours annually of drone surveillance of border communities. There's at least 6,000 people who have died while traversing the desert because of policies that we put in place to make it harder for them to go to the port of entry. There was a condition that was put into a law to mandate 34,000 people be kept in immigrant detention, not because there were 34,000 people who they had arrested, but because that seemed like a good number by a senator who slipped it into a spending bill. And there was also this package that was going through that had failed already prior, five years prior, that at the last minute, while it had a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people, it also had a huge amendment for additional border security, which made it hard, I learned, for FCNL to fully support it at the end, because it felt like it was a trade-off that didn't need to happen. And so, mind you, all of that happened prior to me starting at FCNL. Prior. This is prior to 2014. And so, as I am doing this work, I am also acutely aware that it was purposely hidden from me. I'm not supposed to know about the pain of immigrants. I'm not supposed to know about the raids that happen, about the fear. And one of the amazing things that led to DACA is that dreamers or other undocumented youth started saying, I'm not going to be afraid to tell my story. I'm going to go to the legislators. I'm going to ask them to change this for me. And I think that there is a huge amount of power in that. And so as I think now, as I am more and more aware of my citizenship, that I didn't do anything for, thanks, Mom and Dad, I guess. Right, like I am very aware of my citizenship and what it means for me to live a life with integrity now that I know people who are so abandoned by Congress. So my challenge to you is think what is within your capacity as a citizen now that we have become so aware of how cruel our system can be.
Thank you, Hannah and Itzel. So I want to just say a word about format. I'm going to ask them questions that they'll respond to, probably for about the next 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to turn it back and gather questions from you. And I know there's been cards circulating, and there'll be someone picking up those questions. And we're going to go until 8:30, right? Yeah, so then we'll, is that what time we leave? 8:45. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm challenged by time. Okay, so here we go. And we've talked about these questions, so they have some idea what's coming from me, but not so much what's coming from you. So you can stump them. I want to ask each of you to talk a little bit about both the spiritual and/or emotional challenges you face in this work, because both of you are working in different capacities, but day in, day out on these issues.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. So I would say the personal toll that it takes, I handle 5 different campaigns in New Jersey. Some that are state level policy, we obviously look at federal policy, but my favorite one is the DACA program. And what that means is that I get to work with amazing, amazing young people, 12-year-olds, 13, 14, 25, 27, folks who either have DACA, would have had DACA since the program has been terminated, or are still undocumented or caught somewhere in the system. But it just kind of falls under immigration reform. I think the most challenging thing about that job is sitting down and having those hard conversations with them. That there is no pathway to citizenship, that you cannot be a teacher no matter how hard you want to be, and how much your heart is in it, that you should be afraid. And that is a challenging thing to tell a student. As we were preparing for this conversation, I thought a lot about how often I get a parent who will flag me down at a party, at the library, because on Saturdays I'm a librarian, at any point in time, who will come to me and say, I have a child who is undocumented, and they have given up. They don't want to go to high school anymore. They don't want to go off to college because they think it's not likely and that they're not allowed to go to college. And can you please talk to them? And every time I have that conversation, it is unfortunately not one as hopeful as I wish it could be. I can't fix their status. I can't give them scholarships and grants and change the mindset of a lot of our neighbors. What I can do is tell them the painful lessons that I've had to learn, that other people have taught me, and dealing with the fear and the anxiety of them every day. I get text messages at 3 a.m. of people who can't sleep because they're afraid. I hear of students who are saving money, not for a car or a house, but in case a parent gets detained, so they have the ability to bail them out. And if you have any notion of how much bails cost in an immigration system, where you have to pay 100% of the bond, $13,000 is a fairly common bond. So for any student to be preparing to bail out a parent, to be talking to parents about signing off their children in case they're detained, I think that is the most challenging part of the work, because it never ceases to shock me, it never ceases to hurt me, it never ceases to upset me to see the tears and the anxiety and the fear that comes from having these conversations over and over and over again. And I think the worst part is that I don't think it'll get fixed soon. And that is also something that is really painful to have to acknowledge with them and to have to go through it with every family that I get to meet.
So last spring, I was talking to my colleagues, and we came up with a great idea that I still think is a great idea, which is that there should be an advice column in a Friends publication that is called Asking for a Friend. So you would write in, and so we pitched this to Friends Journal via Twitter. But the first question that I was thinking, and the reason that this came up, is that I wanted to know, how can a person direct all of the fire and fury of the universe at Jeff Sessions and still maintain their Quakerism. ... asking for a friend, ... But I mean, this was in spring of 2018. We had just gotten word about the expansion of the zero tolerance policy, which then led to family separation, which we all saw the news of. And this zero tolerance policy was a directive from the Attorney General at the time. And it mandated that every single person who crossed the border unauthorized should be criminally prosecuted. And in order to criminally prosecute an adult, you have to forcibly separate them from a child they might be traveling with. And so we had just gotten word of this and had no idea how truly horrible and chaotic it was going to be, but you have that sense of fear and dread. And I think that the part that is spiritually challenging to me is exactly that question. And exactly what Diane talked about in opening remarks is that it is so crucial, and I believe that we should be practicing love, that we should be practicing and seeing and answering to that of God in every person. And sometimes it is challenging to know how to do that and still hold people accountable when those people are seemingly single-handedly creating this chaos, generations so, and that there are people right across the street from us who could do something about it, and change is slow. And so I think that we'll get into what we feel hopeful about, but I struggle with that, and I also know that it is so important to keep on to work towards our prophetic vision, because if we aren't doing it, who will? And that there is a spiritual struggle within that I think is part of the work.
So one of the, before I came to FCNL, I was doing advocacy at the state level, and I was working on housing and homelessness. And I remember having a time, much older than you all were, but thinking about how can I be politically engaged and be a spiritually grounded person? And that has come back to me time and time again. And I am very clear that part of my spiritual calling is to look at root causes of broken problems and address systems. And that the way we can do that in this country as citizens and as people who can petition our government by going to talk to them is through Congress. And so that feels very much like a calling to me. And I would say that FCNL is the place that I think other people hear this. So one, we're nonpartisan. I think it's really important that people know that we are a nonpartisan organization. We work with elected officials who are Republicans and Democrats and who are another party, if there is one. There is, not very many, but there are a couple. But that doesn't mean that we don't have particular views on individual actions that elected officials take. We do. But we really work, at least in our office culture, and I think in the work we do around the country, to try to be open-minded and to be open-hearted, because we know that it's possible for people to change, and we know that the people who agree with us need to hear from us and need to have that affirmation as well. So the practice of lobbying I see as a form of spiritual discipline. I love that the conversation was that the practice of allyship in our Bible half hours was talked about as a form of spiritual discipline. And I love that in the conversation around what were the racial assessment conversation, the question about is addressing white supremacy in our culture a spiritual practice? Yeah. These are all spiritual practices because they go to our heart and soul. And so it's very important that we think about, we may not do all of them all the time, every day, but they are all part of our becoming more deeply grounded in God. So my next question to you gets to this question, it's to the point that you touched on, but what does give you hope? What invigorates you? You started talking a little bit about well, maybe this was what you said to me the other day about young people.
Yeah.
But that, and then also, Hannah, can I ask you specifically to talk about partners, coalitions?
Sure. So what gives me hope are young people. Not anything against anybody who is not considered in that group, but I think it's really telling of, despite all the negative things that you can pick and choose about this country and the highlights and the lows, it's really telling to me that undocumented people get to walk the halls of Congress and demand something from representatives. You're not part of the system, and yet here you are holding them accountable, asking them to do something for you. I really, really, really think that there's something to it. There's a beauty to this country because of that. I don't know if I would even be able to lobby in my own country where I came from, but I know I can here, and that is partly why I love this place. But what gives me hope are those young people, are the young people that decide to step up, to share their story, to have a voice. Sharing your story is a scary thing, and every time you do it, I can tell you for myself, it's always a risk and a challenge, and it's always different depending on who you speak to. And it's always a process, it's a therapy to be able to tell somebody what your existence means and what it's been like and your journey. But what gives me hope is, and this is gonna connect back to my advocacy course stuff. The first time that we went to Spring Lobby Weekend, I took 8 students that had DACA, and they had never been politically active. They had never done much. They didn't know anything about politics. And yet, when we went and we got the training for them, and they did the same thing that I did as far as the experience, they came back and they became presidents of their own Dreamers Club. And they started to apply for another Dreamers Club at a different college. And they decided to come back and carry out their own trainings, and they decided to step up and have an open conversation with our community at large. And that is, I think, what gives me hope the most, to see this wave of young people, both in the immigrant youth movement and beyond, be in solidarity with a lot of our movement, come to us and have an open conversation about what it means to be undocumented. There's no question that I love working with youth, and that is, I think, a crucial part that we often overlook. What Diane had mentioned earlier about welcoming the Advocacy Corps, but just young people in general. I think that's crucial. I think we should never overlook their talents, their hopes, and their dreams, because that vision is what's going to get us to who we want to be. And to me, there's nothing better than working with them and listening to them and seeing them come to be the best that they can be. Whenever I get super, super upset and I get down, and again, as a DACA recipient, this work is my professional job and then my personal life, right? Any decision that comes in policy is not just a theory. Unfortunately, I have to live with whatever consequence that may bring for my own self. I always horn back to them. I always go back to them, to their fearlessness, to their desire to be something better. And I think one of the things that often inspires me the most is the fact that they dare to dream. Right? Dreaming in and of itself, it's supposed to be something silly, but to dare to dream puts you in a very vulnerable place. You don't go around telling people your dreams. Right? You don't just like show up to a place and you're like, you know what I want to be when I grow. Like, people don't do that, and yet they trust me to tell me what they dream of, and they proclaim it in front of people. And again, many of them are undocumented. So for you to dare to dream that one day you will be a congressperson, for a lot of people, it would be like, how dare you? Where do you get this crazy idea that you one day will be something, anything, in a system that does not allow you to exist, that literally hunts you down? And for me, every time I sit with a student, and there's one that comes to mind, she wants to be a doctor. And when I heard that, I really was touched to think that under this administration, in the worst of the worst, she dares to dream to be a tool of service for the rest of her community nevertheless. And you would think that that dream would start to fade every time you hit that wall. There's no funding for undocumented students. You're not able to be a doctor because you can't get professional license. And in the face of it all, she still dares to do it. She's following through with it because what she has is hope, endless, never-ending hope that one day things will change and she will actually be able to be who she wants to be. And to me, there's nothing more inspiring than being there to witness that, to see that dream come to life, to help in any way, shape, or form that I can. That is what I go back to all the time. Whenever I get upset, I go through our little group chat that we have, and I think about the dreams that they have and how I can't give up. We have to make them come a reality. And the only way that we do that is by continuing to work on it, as frustrating as it may be. One day we will win. And in Dreamer circles, that's a very common chant. I believe that we will win, and we will because we know we're right. We're on the right side of history. There's no question about it. And for me, I think of that, right? When we actually get it, what a feeling it'll be to know that, and what a humbling experience to have been part of that, to have made that happen. And so that's what keeps me going, that I know that one day we will get there, and it'll be a glorious day.
I was going to say, the thing that keeps me going, that gives me hope, is that you heard about the vision of the world that we seek. We seek a community where every person's potential may be fulfilled, and it is very visionary. It is something that seems hard to grasp, and yet it is relevant, and it is shared across the coalitions that we are part of. So the two major coalitions that we are a part of are the Interfaith Immigration Coalition, which is a coalition of 53 national faith-based organizations that all have endorsed an immigration platform that is beautiful. At one of our strategy sessions, we read it out loud because we had to remind ourselves what it was that we were working towards. You can find it on our website. But it is a very important thing to be so grounded in faith, in a town that sometimes forgets the people when they are so wrapped up in the politics. So I just want to reiterate that it is really important that part of the work that we do is nonpartisan, because we don't care which politicians put it into place. We care about the policy at the end of the day. So the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is a great partner in the work that we do. And we are also part of what is called the Defund Hate Coalition, and AFSC is also part of this coalition. And it brings me such joy to have Quakers be at the table it's co-convened by United We Dream, which is the largest Dreamer organization and undocumented youth organization that exists, and Detention Watch Network, which is a similar organizing network across the country. And we are following their lead, and there are two Quaker organizations that are there to do the work. This coalition I can go more into, but it is really, really, really laser focused on what is it that Congress can do through the spending process to stop some of the worst proposals from being implemented. So it's really putting it back into, rather than being in despair that it seems as all of these new executive actions, new policies are coming out from the executive branch, it's really challenging Congress to take up their role, their responsibility, and also the role of people and of constituents in that to challenge their members of Congress not to forget or abdicate that responsibility.
Hannah, say a little bit more about that, because we're going to get, I want to talk a little bit about possible things people can do, and I know you both have suggestions, but stick with Congress and the appropriations process for a minute, because so part of this that, this can get a little wonky, but there used to be a way, like when you took civics or government, you learned the process for how a budget gets made and approved. Yeah, that's not happening anymore. It's a completely different process, and it's very convoluted, and you don't need to know all the machinations of back and forth, but what's in the budget? I mean, you know, what entities is Congress appropriating funding for, and what in particular do we want to stop, and what do we want to support?
Okay. So every year, Congress goes through a process, it is messy, to decide how they are going to fund the entire federal government. And there's 12 different bills that they develop. The one that we pay the most attention to in terms of the negative pieces is the Department of Homeland Security, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement bucket, so ICE, and Customs and Border Protection, which also houses Border Patrol. And so CBP and ICE, if you hear those are two enforcement agencies that have drastically grown in the past 30 years that I talked about, that Congress hasn't actually revisited the system. And so what is happening right now is we are just enforcing this broken, outdated, very punitive system with immense individual harm, and we keep putting more money into those enforcement buckets without the underlying policy change. So when we are working in coalition with the Defund Hate Coalition, we are asking Congress through their spending process to limit the amount of money that goes to those accounts. Ideally, we would like to cut that money altogether. It's about $27 billion that goes to that annually. And that includes for detention, it includes for agents, both patrolling interior, to the interior of the United States and border, anywhere in the border zone, which is 100 miles. And it also includes the wall, right? So it's detention, agents, and wall or fencing or barriers or whatever you want to call it, but border militarization. And so we are engaging in that process to actually limit that spending or drastically reduce it. And we do have members of Congress who are pushing for that, and that is because of our work. And we are asking for that money to also come with parameters, right? So increased oversight of detention centers that are harming people, that don't have any accountability because of how rapidly they've grown. That is the piece that also comes into other bills that will care for unaccompanied minors, but that is the main, of the 12 appropriations bills, we are really, really focused on Congress saying no to additional money that is meant to carry out some of the worst proposals from this administration, including the asylum ban, Muslim ban, refugee ban, the ending of DACA, which currently is caught up by the courts, but we don't know how long that will last. And so all of these pieces can have oversight through the spending process. The other piece that I'll just mention is that we know that they have to vote on this because otherwise the government shuts down. And so when we are thinking, where is it that we can guarantee that we will have sway, it is through the spending process that is guaranteed to go through every year, which is unlike standalone bills. It's the best I can do.
That was very good. That was really well done, Hannah. So, Itzel, in your work, you know, what you're doing now, I mean, I know you're an advocate with Congress, but you're also an advocate in other ways, and I think probably in ways that people, you know, I mean, we're hearing so much about what's happening at the border, but the challenge for people who are undocumented and the challenge around immigration and deportation and exists in probably every state, and people know, but you can tell us a little bit about New Jersey and sort of what can people do? What can we do?
Yeah, so I think the crisis at the border highlights the worst of the worst, right? What happens when you have terrible policies, and here is what that looks like. But family separation is happening every day in every state, right? There are raids that are increasingly targeting individuals when they're walking on their way to work, when they are dropping their kids off at school. There has been so many technical changes to the way that immigration law is done that even people who once considered themselves to have a closed case, administratively closed, no longer have that protection. And so in many ways, it's a free-for-all. And that is terrifying. As far as what you can do, in New Jersey, there's a couple of campaigns, and I'm sure that there's an equal one in your state. Our biggest one that we're hoping to see a huge win on by the end of the year is the expansion of driver's license. And again, reframe yourself as to when you use your social security number. Every time you write it down, that's a time that I, before, and 11 million other people are not able to use that service. If you see an application that says social security number, that means that it's more than likely inaccessible to an undocumented person, including your driver's license. And in New Jersey, driving as it is anywhere is super important. And what people often forget is that the way most undocumented people come in contact with law enforcement is when you're driving without a license. Your car may be insured under somebody else's name, but when the officer requires an ID, you don't have one. And so, depending on the state, it may be that he gives you a pass the first time, but you gotta drive every day. And if he sees you again, he's likely to stop you because there's no way that in a week you've figured out your whole situation. And so they'll stop you again. And it'll eventually become and can become a pipeline into detention and eventually deportation. And so New Jersey has 500,000 people that would benefit from us being able to provide an expansion to driver's license. And the benefits are huge to the rest of the people. A, the amount of uninsured drivers on the road would drop. Hit and runs will drop. Because what people don't understand is that if you get in a fender bender, that could actually, for you as an undocumented person, end in deportation. So it's not so much the $1,000 payment, it's the fact that you're probably going to be detained right then and there. So fighting back against those types of laws that don't really seem like the first wave of defense for undocumented folks, but are. If you haven't heard of a campaign to expand driver's license in your state, plug in. Find out where that is being ran, because there is only 13 states so far that have provided that benefit to undocumented people, the latest one being New York. And again, hopefully by the end of the day, it'll be New Jersey. The second thing that I will talk about, because this is one of the things that we're doing in our community, where I come from, it's a predominantly white area still. And going back to what Hannah said about your citizenship privileges, there are folks here, as I've gone through workshops, that are plugged in directly into rapid response teams. And a rapid response is people who are willing to witness a raid. So if immigration comes to a house, people that are willing to drive over to that house and record from their safe distance what the officers are doing, and that cuts down on an officer having this sense of maybe overstepping their boundaries. It also means putting into place support services in our area. So if we don't have the ability to catch them and hopefully stop a deportation, what can we do for that family afterwards? Is there a neighbor that would be willing to drive a student to their school? Because guess what? If your dad was the only one driving and he got detained, you don't have a ride to school. Is there a neighbor that is a citizen that would be willing to be the person to pay bond? When you pay bond, you have to be a citizen, and oftentimes we're dealing with mixed status families where the citizen might be the youngest one in the family. And so you have to be 18, and all it takes, depending on your state, but in New Jersey, you just have to go and give the money over to the Office of Immigration. So that's another huge thing, that what it creates when you don't have a citizen that you can trust is a whole market of people that take advantage of you in that situation. And I've dealt with it. I've dealt with a lady whose husband got detained, and he was set for a $30,000 bond. Our lawyer, who has been doing immigration law for 33 years, had never heard of a bond that high and actually thought it was a typo, but it wasn't. And so with the help of the community and her church, she came up with $30,000, but she's not a citizen. And neither is her daughter, who's over 18. The only citizen in the house was 5. And so she went to this bond person who was supposed to give that money over to them, but they never actually got there. So what that means is that she had to come up with another $30,000 out of wherever she could. She literally, when I went to visit her, had just cut off the electricity. And that is something where if there's 4 or 5 people in a meeting that are willing to be those people, it would make a world of difference to have that. It could be that you want to be the person who's witnessing, or it could be that you simply reach out to an immigrant rights group that's doing direct work and say, hey, if you're in need of somebody to post bond, I will be willing to take a day off or an afternoon to go pay bond and make sure that this family doesn't fall prey to scam or somebody who may take their money away. And that does happen. And so it's little things like that, something like the driver's license, checking in with your local immigrant rights group and see where citizens can be of service. That can make a world of difference for people in our community.
Great suggestions. We're going to turn to questions now. If our question collators are ready, we're ready to take questions that you've given us. And while they're coming up, let me do a little promotion to say that if you are not currently on FCNL's email list, we ask and encourage you to join. And you can do that by signing up on the sign-in sheet that Christine has organized outside. You can do it by going to our website and signing up. We don't automatically put people on our list, and so you need to proactively put your name on it. I think the weekly email that we do called This Week is one of the best. I really encourage you to get it, and I encourage you to take action as well, but I just wanted to put that promotion out there. Liz?
I wanted to say that we are going to take questions now until 8:45.
Oh, yeah.
But after that, we will break briefly and people can come up front. We're going to continue the questions in this room. So if you can stay, please do.
Okay.
And I have one more thing to say.
Okay, well, are we ready for the questions? All right, Hannah is going to say one more thing and then we're ready for you.
I was just going to say that in all of the incredible work that is happening at the community level and these like truly, truly human examples of how the system is so unworkable and so cruel, I think that what I just want to make a plug for is make sure that there is somebody on that committee who is providing the support, whose job it is to communicate that to your member of Congress. Because it's these kinds of stories that are what move people to understand that this is a policy change that needs to happen. And so often there is a lot of this work that is happening. And so maybe you are there to do the direct service and you are there to make sure that you are showing up for your community members directly. And maybe your role is to be the liaison, to be the communicator. And so have that be part of your action plan for how you're showing up.
If you were to write a comprehensive immigration reform bill, what would be in it?
I think that's for you, Hannah.
Actually, I think it's probably for both of you.
President. It's like a presidential. I will say there are a lot of things that I would put in a comprehensive immigration reform bill. What we have been working on most recently is a pathway to citizenship, not just for Dreamers, not just for temporary protected status recipients, which is another category that's recently lost status, but also for their family members, for their parents, and the rest of the 11 million undocumented folks who have been in this country. It is a community issue, and I think that it is really important for us to not lose sight of that pathway to citizenship and actually creating pathways that don't exist right now. So that would be a priority. The other piece that I didn't lift up is detention reform. So I would really, really, really challenge the way that we look at detention in this country. The way that immigrant detention is used is highly inappropriate. And so there is a bill currently in Congress that's called the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, which would proactively prohibit the detention of people who are under 21, the detention of asylum seekers. It would prohibit the detention of pregnant people. It would go into saying, these are the people you cannot detain, and I think that that is just the starting place, that we really need to make sure that we are not detaining people in civil immigrant detention. And so that's just to say, we've enforced our way enough, we don't necessarily need to do that. And those are two pieces that we can build support for right now.
If I could have a dream bill, it would definitely provide pathway to citizenship for everybody who's undocumented in the country. One of the main things that we push back on is this rhetoric of only dreamers deserve a solution. Everybody deserves a solution. Generations. I think we start getting into sticky territory when we start saying who is deserving of something and who isn't, because who am I to decide what is worth it or who somebody's worth is. So that would be one thing. The second thing that I would do is I would completely abolish for-profit detention centers right off the bat. Nobody, absolutely nobody should be making money out of detaining people and lining their pockets with it. I have come more and more to think that we should really start looking at people and not judging them, but really putting together where their money is coming from, right? So you are what you make money of. Mm-hmm. And I hope that we start doing that, because many of these people who are putting kids in cages wear a suit and tie and go into the halls and are treated with a lot of respect and dignity. And it's not to say that they're not human at the end of the day, but I do think we need to start, as Hannah mentioned earlier, holding them accountable. And so that's, I think, that would be like my biggest thing. Everybody gets something, and then we completely take off the for-profit.
That is also included in the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act. Thank you.
What they said.
Please suggest some ways to advocate for and assist immigrants living in my home city, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Do you want to expand on what you were saying?
Mention about the sign. Just having a sign.
Oh yeah, so, sure. So I would say, again, plug in and be willing to take cues from the people that are doing the work on the ground. Be willing to listen. I think one of the biggest bridges that we found are young people, because as Hannah mentioned, you're fearless, right? You've bought into this American ideal of justice and righteousness, and you really give it back to community at large. But it's the little things too. When I was in high school, my high school was also predominantly white, and the amount of undocumented students in that school is very small. And so you are a very small part of the ecosystem, and it's hard to come out and talk to a teacher about it. The first person that I ever told the story about my status was my history teacher. And that was because she believed in me and in my potential and saw me beyond my status, and I felt that I owed her an explanation as to why I wasn't applying to colleges. And when I said that to her, it's literally like I took my little heart out and put it in my hand and handed it over to her. I didn't know whether she was going to be an ally or not. But what I do know is that it mattered in the way that she reacted to me afterwards, because when I told her that, she said to me, "Students like you, we will find a way." And that meant everything to me, that she was there and she was willing to do it. And our high school went above and beyond. And I think if you're in a position where you supervise something or you are a place where people come to, it's important to let it be unapologetically known that you're an ally. To put it out there, to put that signal out into the sky to say, you are welcome here. And that's what our high school principal did. Outside, when you walk right into our high school and you literally make a tube, you just barely turn it right, there's a sign there that said, "Dreamers are welcome here." And that told me that it was going to be okay. that I could go into that office and have an honest conversation with her about my future and my fears and what I was afraid of. And it means so much as a lost little confused child to see somebody go out of their way to let you know that they are there for you. So if it's something as small in your congregation as putting up a sign, I think if anything is a badge of honor, let it be known that we welcome the stranger. Let it be known that we are those people. And so things of that sort, on top of like the bigger campaigns, the way that we use language, every time I hear illegal, I'm like, hold up, this can go wrong really quickly. And I get really, because even though you may be coming from a good place, those are not words that are used for anybody else. No human being is legal. There's no such thing as that. That's not even a verb to describe somebody. And so using words and correcting. Yesterday when we did a session with some of the middle schoolers, we talked about, and Hannah did a really good job at explaining that sometimes the harder lobbying you ever do is within your own spaces. So when you hear that word say, we don't say that, it's undocumented, because the only thing that distinguished me from being a full-fledged American is a piece of paper. It's not because I'm illegal. There's no such thing as that. And so that's how I would know, literally, if I could go back to high school, if somebody used the word undocumented, that might be the first person that I go talk to and open up to, because they have said to me that my existence is not illegal, and that matters. So on top of the big, huge campaign work that you can do in the rapid response, doing small things like that to put yourself out there and say, I am here for you if you ever want to come to me. And don't be shocked when people do come to you and have a conversation.
The New York Times ran a piece about ways to advocate for immigrants and suggested donating to bail bond funds. Is this effective? If so, do I give to a fund in my state or some other fund?
You really know that better than I do.
The bail bonds are really effective. If there's a way, again, if there's a local group that you can tap into and say we would be willing to make a certain amount of donation, or again, just to help post that bond, it would be really, really helpful. I don't know of any organization that does it on a national level and how that money would be distributed. So I would definitely encourage you to do it state by state. And if you can do it in your own community, then that's even better, because oftentimes it's that humanizing of the issue that makes you realize how really, really, really messed up this whole thing is.
I think there actually might be a national fund through Freedom for Immigrants.
Yeah, you're right.
And so that is one resource. And the other resource that folks might want to check out is informedimmigrant.com, which is really geared more towards immigrants themselves, but has a lot of resources also for allies, and has been vetted, because if you talk, as Itzel was talking about, there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of people who are looking to take advantage of people in the situation, and it has service providers that are bona fide, right? So that is also a way to get a sense of what's already happening in your area.
How can people using direct action and active nonviolence coordinate with those working on the legislative process, such as blockading at Fort Sill?
Blockading at Fort Sill. Okay. I think the main thing that I have already impressed upon you, but I will say it once again, the main piece is make sure that the people in power are hearing the message. That there is a lot of very, very important activity that is happening, and there's also a lot that's happening in DC, and this is a hard issue and an issue that people don't want to pay attention to. And so as we are having these kinds of direct action, as we're having these big rallies, as we're having these mobilizations, again, make sure that there is not only a media strategy with that, but also a member of Congress strategy that people who attend those events, they go home and they write a letter to the editor and they say, and they call out their member of Congress and they say, I went and I blockaded Fort Sill. What are you doing as a member of Congress to provide oversight for this facility expansion? And so that is the best way that I can give to help coordinate that. Through our coalitions, we try to do our best, but you all are the constituents. I can go in and tell a staff member that something happened that probably involved some of their constituents, but if you are telling them yourself, that actually helps amplify it and makes people pay attention and makes it easier for us to go in and say, and here's what you do about it.
Do you want to say something about using social media for that kind of communication?
Yeah, you can tweet at your member of Congress.
Twitter is a very big way to communicate with members of Congress because all of them are on it and it's instantaneous. I mean, they're looking at it all the time and their staffs are looking at it all the time, and a lot of journalists use it. So it's definitely in high use in Washington, D.C. What about Facebook?
So Facebook is a little bit more hit or miss in terms of whether it's the actual member who's paying attention, but there is a way that you can become a constituent through Facebook that gives you a little constituent badge, which means that if you are engaging with their official page, that you have that little constituent badge, and that can go a long way too. So I would also say be annoying. Tweet at them, Facebook them, write them an email, and then follow up with a call and say, I just want you to know that I wrote you an email and I tweeted and all of these things. But I think it really is be annoying and also build a relationship, but part of that is sustained contact.
Yeah, and I want to clarify the distinction about, you can be very persistent, which is the way of being annoying, and still be respectful, because that's clearly, important to do, but that persistence shows that you are expecting their respect back to you, too, to give them an answer. But I do think that we have encouraged people to be in contact by Twitter because I think that's a good way, particularly if something really current like direct action is going on. I'm here on the border doing this direct action. I want to make sure you know about it. It's great to follow up too.
And I think I'll add this last part. It wouldn't be an FCNL panel if I don't tell you to go lobby. Go lobby. Show up. That you're going to their house, and that's a lot more threatening to them. 86% of Americans believe across party lines that there should be a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. If those 86% of Americans showed up to their congressional offices tomorrow, something would be done much quicker than it is right now. People need to show up. People that look like you need to show up, because what they're expecting is people that look like me who go in there and say, please do something about my situation. What they're not expecting is people like you to say, this is personal to me. You will not get away with this. I will come back tomorrow and the next day and the next day until my neighbors have something that they desperately need. That is scary. I can't vote, but I do feel empowered because I can mobilize all of you to vote on my behalf. The only reason why I am willing to share my story and deal with the ramifications that may bring. As Hannah mentioned, DACA is currently in the courts, and there's a possibility, there's a 50-50 chance that come the spring, the program will dissolve. And what that means is that every day that goes past, I will look at whatever expiration date is on my card and go back to being undocumented. And my face cannot be erased from anything that I've done, the actions, the calls, the mobilizing, this session right here. But my story is what makes it human. It makes it real. If you haven't met an undocumented person, here is the former one and still in many ways one. When we have people like you show up for people like me, they've realized this isn't a Latinx issue, a people of color issue. This is an American issue. This is a principled stance that we must take on who we are as a country. As Diane said, we always not necessarily have lived up to what we want to be, but that doesn't mean we have to make the same mistake again. And it is up to people like you and me to make sure that this is the last time that we don't live up to that ideal of welcoming the stranger. And so, lobby. it's scary, but if I could do it, you can do it too. So like show up, talk to them, tell them that it matters to you.
This is probably the last question, just time-wise, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Being here in rural Iowa, where farming and farm crises are ever present, and many immigrants also work in the farming sector, what policies are FCNL? What policies are being pushed forward by FCNL to address these important issues?
I mean, so I'm going to take us back to funding. The most immediate way that we are pushing members of Congress to really stand with immigrants, including people who are integral to Iowa, to all of our communities, is by limiting funding for enforcement. And really standing up and saying we are not going to allocate one more dime for these policies that are ripping communities apart. And so I think that there is an opportunity, especially with more rural communities, with farms, with other industry, to help expand that message to unlikely allies who are otherwise pretty conservative, but are seeing the ways that fear of enforcement and that raids, they're seeing the ways that that is manifesting in their communities. And so one of the ways that we are engaged is through coalition work as well with industry to the extent that we can. But I think the most immediate way is through this funding bill, right? Are members of Congress going to vote for more money that will destabilize communities because of fear? I don't know if y'all saw, well, maybe you don't know, but there's a new date for raids. People think that they're going to start July 15th, the week of July 15th. And so the ripple effect that has in communities is felt by Americans as well. So one of the ways that we are trying to push that is by helping to make that connection to the funding and to the spending debate, because members of Congress aren't necessarily getting it, that is the next vote that they will take to protect immigrants or not, or to protect industry or not. So that's one way.
So if the technology is working, as we close tonight and leave, we have a just brief PowerPoint of slides. They're just visual slides that show how much fun lobbying is.
Yes.
If you come to our spring lobby weekend. And so I want to close again by inviting you to certainly join with others in your community who are advocating for the reforms that we need in our broken immigration system, but to join FCNL in the other issues we work on as well. Our annual meeting is open to everyone. There are general committee members that we expect to be there because we have business to conduct, but we encourage others to come because we have a lobby day in Washington. But you don't have to go to Washington to lobby. All of your states have district offices that you can actually go to, but you can also pick up the phone, which is a great way to be in contact with offices. So,
and we have materials as you exit. One of the pieces is something that you could leave behind at your member of Congress's office that has the ask around investing in true alternatives and divesting from detention and deportation.
Christine Ashley is in the back. Christine, if you don't know Christine, I don't know how you could not know Christine, actually. But Christine is our Quaker Field Secretary and our Energizer woman for moving everything out into the field. So stop and see her. And we will, Liz, do you want to make the announcement about?
Yeah, those of you who have to leave, please do it quietly and quickly, and those who would like to participate in the questions, please come down front.
Thank you.